good evening, and welcome to tonight's virtual town hall. I am Nekesha Bownes, Director of Community or Director of Outreach.
Good evening, and welcome.
Take a moment at this time and please share this with all of your friends. Share this page. We are live on Facebook as well as YouTube. So take a few moments, come on in and share it with your friends. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Nekesha Bownes, and I am the Director of Outreach Ministries here at Macedonia Baptist Church. Our outreach ministries encompasses our missions, manna pantry, civic responsibility, and our garden ministries. But tonight, our civic responsibility ministry is presenting to you this town hall. Our purpose as a ministry is to educate and empower the community on social and economic injustices. And one of the areas that we would like to empower the community on is the issue of voting. So tonight's town hall is focused on voter registration, the importance of voting, and understanding how changes to legislation can actually turn into law. So let me introduce you to tonight's panel. First, we have Kesha Chatman, who is the Division Operating Officer of Urban League of Metro St. Louis. Welcome. We also have the Honorable Judge Zena Cruz, who is the Circuit Judge of the 20th Judicial Court. Welcome. We have next LaToya Greenwood, who is the Illinois representative of the 114th District. Welcome, Ms. Greenwood. And then last but certainly not least, Ms. Peggy LeCompte, the 10th president of the Top Ladies of Distinction. Welcome, ladies. Thank you once again for taking the time out of your schedule to have this conversation with us tonight. I feel that this is going to be a great topic. We're in an election year, and this is the time more than ever to educate our community on the importance of voting and how to vote. So let's start it off. Voter registration. We know that it is a requirement for those who are eligible to vote to register before they are allowed to vote in any upcoming elections. So, Ms. Chapman, can you take a few minutes and tell us who is actually eligible to vote?
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. So, you must be a U.S. citizen. You must be 17 years old before the date of the primary election and must have turned 18 before the general election. Okay. You must be living in the precinct that you are voting in at least 30 days prior to the election. You cannot be serving a sentence of confinement, and you cannot claim the right to vote in any other place. For instance, if you have a residence in Iowa and you're living here in Illinois, then you can't say, "Oh, I'm gonna vote in Iowa now," and then you can't do that. So you have to have one place that you are dedicated to voting for. So that is the general gist of individuals who can register to vote.
Thank you. That's good to know. You talked about currently you can't serve or vote if you're currently serving a sentence. Recently, in an interview, West Coast rapper Snoop Dogg said that he's going to vote for the first time in this upcoming election because he thought that he wasn't eligible to vote because of his criminal record.
Yes.
Um, are you still eligible to vote if you have a criminal record?
I am so glad that you asked this question. This is a pretty serious subject because there are individuals who believe that they are not eligible to vote. Now, true enough, different states have different laws, but there are quite a few states that will allow you, such as Illinois.
Mhm.
Illinois, oh gosh, there's quite a few states. It's about maybe 20 of them where once you are released from prison, your voting rights are automatically restored. Um, there are two states that while you are still in prison, you can still vote, and that's Maine and Vermont. Okay. There are two states where voting rights are restored automatically upon a release from prison and you're discharged from parole, and that is California and Connecticut. So you have to be released from prison and off of parole in order to vote in those two states. Um, then there are quite a few states more that voting rights are restored automatically upon completion of your sentence, including prison, parole, and probation. So you want to check with your state's guidelines. But for Illinois, I'll speak for Illinois and Missouri, even though there may be people tuned in from all over. But for Illinois, your voting rights are automatically restored upon the release of prison. It doesn't matter if you are still going to probation or whatever. So once you're released, you should re-register yourself to vote, period. For Missouri, your voting rights are automatically restored once you are released and you have concluded your prison, parole, and probation time. So once that has done, then you can re-register to vote in Missouri. But different states have different laws, so you definitely want to do your research because the information is out there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I wasn't aware of that. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who weren't aware that in some states that some things are just automatically
Absolutely.
changed, so to
Yes.
speak, once you complete your sentence. So that's great to know. You mentioned about looking at your own state guidelines to find out, what the rules are. How do you, once we're registered and we've got everything cleared, how do you even find your local polling place? And what do you need to bring once you um, show up to the polls? Because we do know that voter suppression exists. So we want to make sure after you've gone through the trouble of getting registered that you don't get turned away once you get to the polling place.
Great question. So, it's a couple of things I kind of want to tackle in this conversation. Once you go, you definitely want to make sure you have at least two forms of ID and at least and something that will verify your proof of residency. I understand many people in various communities have a high mobility rate. You travel, you move often. So I would encourage voting is important. And if you are serious about making sure your voice is heard, then do a little research. If you are not sure, contact the Urban League. We can do some research for you to find out where your polling place is for the area that you're living in. Or what area you are assigned to if you have just recently moved. There are different websites that you can go to, and you may want to check for your specific state. For Illinois, it's elections.il.gov. That website is very it has a lot of information and it's very user friendly. This website, once you punch in your zip code, it tells you, or your address, it tells you exactly where your voting location is. So you know exactly where to go. You can also find out who's running and do a little research on those individuals. Some of those candidates have websites or they may have Facebook pages for their office. So you can do a little research to find out. So when you go, you want to have your two forms of ID, but you also want to give yourself the time and the space to make sure that you research in advance to make sure that you are not taken off track once you get to the polling place and you have your equipment in hand to make sure that your voice is heard at the poll. So do one up, bring 3 forms of ID. It can be your driver's license, it can be your state ID, it can be a utility bill, it can be a certain cases like a paycheck stub, I think in certain cases. So definitely do your due diligence. Bring one extra if you're not sure.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I would like to chime in just to add a couple of more points. I know we're in St. Clair County, so one place that you can always utilize is to go to the St. Clair County Clerk.
Yes.
And also in East St. Louis, we have our own Board of Elections. And so they'll be able to provide you with a lot of useful information as well.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ms. Greenwood. Um, in addition to that, we also have seniors who are still very much eligible to vote, but may not have transportation or a means to get to the polling place. Are there organizations out there that will provide transportation for those seniors to get to the polls? And this is open to anyone. But go ahead, Ms. Chapman.
I was just going to say, honestly, I am still researching. Sometimes around the time of the elections, there are organizations that make themselves available to provide those transportations, to provide transportation. But there was a website called. I don't want to give the incorrect information, but I could not find one for Illinois. So definitely, if there are any organizations that you guys are aware of, please let me know, because I want to make sure I reach out to them and have them as a contact to make sure that all residents, especially our seniors, are able to get out and vote. There have been cases where even the agency was able to help if we had the resources available to pick up and drop off and things like that, because it really is just that important.
So,
if I might chime in, I'm not sure if he still does it, but our county clerk used to go to different nursing homes certain days throughout the election process, and he would get the vote of those residents in some of the nursing homes. I would also check with the local NAACP. President Stanley Franklin may also be a resource of where or who can be contacted to get a ride to the polling place or for early voting.
And also, we have our local Democratic organizations in East St. Louis. I know they provide transportation, the different various precinct committees to from the poll, and it also happens in the Centerville Township as well. So if they can reach out to them too, and various churches who offer transportation as well.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. Thank you all.
Now, I just wanted to add just a quick note.
Sure.
So, recently, when we were in our special session, we did pass legislation that dealt with enhancing voting, expanding voting. And one of the issues in Senate Bill 1863 and House Bill 2238 is about making curbside voting available for seniors and individuals who may not be able to get out and actually go into the poll. All of this was done due to COVID, of course. It'll just be for our upcoming November election. But there were things put in legislation to ensure the safety and while at the same time protecting our right to vote and making sure that we're able to have more people have access to the ballot in November.
I think that's incredible.
Absolutely.
That's incredible and much needed. Thank you for that, Ms. Greenwood. And actually that kind of leads to our next topic. So getting registered to vote, that's the first step to exercising your right as a citizen and making your voice heard, as was mentioned earlier. But not everyone that is actually registered to vote or who's actually eligible to vote will come out to the polls. In the 2016 election, only 58.1% of the total eligible population actually voted in the presidential election. So, Judge Cruz, from a legal standpoint, since you're working within the judicial system, I wanted to talk to you about what happens when we don't vote. What is the impact when we don't get out to the polls?
Sure, thank you. You know, that's a very poignant question, and I'd like to even start from a historical perspective, particularly given the climate that we are experiencing right now. I think there is a cry for a movement. There's a cry for change, and voting is one of those ways to make that happen. In however capacity you're seeking to make that change, we have to understand that it wasn't until 1870 that the 15th Amendment was even ratified, giving African American men the right to vote. And let's call it the right to exercise the right to vote, because as we also know, it was 100 years later before they could even overcome all of the barriers and even legal barriers and challenges that were in place to keep them from voting. Women, 50 years after the 15th Amendment, was the 19th Amendment, when women were, the 19th Amendment was ratified and women received the right to vote. And so please understand that this was not simply someone raised their hands and said, hey, can I vote? We're talking about blood. We're talking about sweat. We're talking about tears. We're talking about people who invested their lives and their livelihoods at the risk of so much turmoil, at the risk of their own lives, to gain this right. And so we have to keep that in mind. I think it's particularly important now because, again, the climate that we are experiencing and that we're living in for 100 years to pass before we could actually overcome the challenges and the barriers that were in place. And so, simply put, our vote is our voice. I know there are a lot of ways that our voices are being heard. Everyone's, not just African Americans, not just women's. This is Pride Month. There are voices across this country. This is what makes America the wonderful country that it is. But also understand that there has been oppression, understand that there has been a struggle, understand that throughout the history of the nation, voting is one of the ways that the voice is heard. So it may not be heard by the physical ears like a protest or a speech, but it is heard by the nation. It's heard by the community. It's heard by the state when you exercise that right to vote. And I understand it is an individual right, but the collective is what makes it a movement. The exercise in the collective is what makes a movement. And how dare we, anyone, sit down and let 58% be that number again? We should exercise that right. We should see it as a responsibility. In fact, my children, as they were growing up, they saw it as a responsibility, as not an option, that they needed to register as soon as they could. And so I think we need our narrative to our children, to our friends, to our nieces, nephews, cousins, anyone that we come in contact with. The narrative needs to be, this is your responsibility. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your community, your state, your nation, to cast your vote so that you can be heard, even if it is proverbially. You know, thinking about voting, make sure your registration information is updated. I know that some clerks throughout the state, their offices purge the rolls if a person hasn't voted over a certain period of time. If you change your name, change your address, make sure all of these things are updated, and understand this is the right that should give you chills, that should make the hair rise on your skin, to be able to make sure that you exercise their right. So what happens is I don't become a judge because you don't have enough folks who are out there understanding the importance of diversity, for example, the importance of experience, for example. And I think throughout the last, probably when we had our African-American president, that was a movement. And it just doesn't have to be a racial movement. It doesn't have to be a gender movement. We just need, if you want to make a movement, voting is one of those ways to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Judge Cruz. That was powerful. That was powerful. I agree that, everyone, you have um, that right to vote. You have a right to make a choice. And there are still some who feel like my vote doesn't count. What's the point of me voting because I'm not going to get the person that I want to see in office. No one is counting my vote. It's rigged. It's how do we dispel this myth that the vote doesn't count? And Ms. LeCompte, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Part of the way we would dispel that myth is to show just the practicality of what your vote can do. We get all focused in on the presidential election, but a lot happens before we get a president.
Mm-hmm.
And so he is impacted by, well, most presidents up until some we have now have been impacted by what the constituency needs and what they want. And so we show them practically what happens at home. What is the impact on your taxes? How much taxes do you have to pay on your home? What kind of schools do you have? All the kinds of things that day-to-day living shows you. We have to show you that that is first before you get to the presidential election, which is every 4 years. And so we can just learn that we make an impact with our legislators who are right there with us, right down the street, right in an office, right in Springfield, that we can get to them a long time before we get to Washington, D.C. or the Senate or Congress. We have to show them the practicality, schools, roads, taxes, liquor fees, what the stores charge you, your wages. All of these are things that focus our attention towards what we can do locally, what we can do on a regional level, and what we can do on a state level. And this pandemic we have right now, even if we look at the treatment from state to state, who has had what happened, what has not happened, who is working, who is not working, whose casinos are open, whose casinos are not open, all the things that make us live in a strategic kind of manner. That is necessary before we get to Washington, D.C. And so we have to understand just practically, this is how we live. This is how we make an impact. It's much easier for me to run to 4700 State Street and find Representative Greenwood than it is for me to try to get to Congress or to the White House to see President Trump or Mitch McConnell. And so that's where we need to get our people to understand that when you don't vote, you're not counted in the mix. When you do vote, you are. And you start at home to make that difference. And as Judge Cruz said, to get people like her elected, we have to work at home. That does not come from DC down. Well, it might come, but we don't see it. But we start here getting our people, our friends, those folks we think are seriously ready to serve us. We get them in office so that we can then make the pack all the way up to the Supreme Court. Who knows, one day we may have a Judge Cruz in the Supreme Court, but it's definitely going to have to start at this level. It cannot start in DC.
Absolutely. That's powerful. Representative Greenwood, did you have a comment on that one?
Well, I just wanted to say I concur with both of the ladies who spoke before me. And it's really about your voice is your power. And so unless you're exercising your voice through the power of voting, then you really have no voice. And so I see all of the protesters like Judge Cruz spoke to, the anger, the sadness, all of these different emotions that people have been experiencing since the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many, many others. And so we will not have the proper impact that we want to have on our communities unless we go and vote. We need people to represent us who have our best interest at heart. And so the only way you can do that is to go out and vote. I recently read a quote from Ella Baker, and she said, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest." And so this is not the time to rest. I know we see so many people marching and protesting, but we should be aiming that protest and that anger to the ballot and
Yes,
getting ready for November and telling our family and our friends the things that we need to do to make sure we have the people in place to represent us come November 3rd.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and a couple of things I heard from both you and Ms. LeCompte. You talked about making those decisions locally. So voting in our local elections is important because that happens before we can even get um, to the White House per se or to the national level. We have to start locally. But historically, the voter turnout is even lower for our local elections versus the national elections. So, and Ms. LeCompte, I'm going to come back to you. Um, how important is it, and just talk a little bit more about how those local elections are, just as important or maybe even more important than the national elections.
Well, I think before we get to even talking about how important they are, it's what we need to do to prepare people to be a part of, I'm going to make my own word up, importantness. Now, what do I mean by that? We have to work together. We've got to collaborate. We've got to coordinate our efforts. We've got to connect. And then our people need to know how to utilize their resources, and they need to know what this information means. That's very important when we get ready to go out into the world and think that we know something. We have to empower them. We got to train them. First, we got to train them to understand the importance of that vote because that's gotten away from us some kind of way, and we think it's all national. We have to advocate for the laws that we want them to push forward. We have to have a common goal, one view, one voice, one vision that will take us to that place that we need to be so that our legislators won't have so many ideas flying around, they don't know which one to grab. So we have to definitely put ourselves together as one, and then we have to organize and get out the vote. Now that takes some work.
Mm,
That takes church, school, home, grocery store, standing on the corner, maybe out in the street with a sign. It's going to take a lot of work. So we're going to have to invade the protest movements, even though I don't even want to walk a mile. Forget about a block, even though I don't want to walk a mile. But we're going to have to get out there and we're going to have to listen to those like me who were at the first march on Washington. We're going to
mm,
have to know what our history is so we can know how to handle our present and prepare our young people for the future. Sometimes we march straight ahead and we're only looking ahead. We have the vision that the horse has when he has the blinders on each side. We have to
mm,
pull those blinders back, open up our eyes, listen, and then prepare. Prepare our young people, sometimes prepare ourselves. I saw somebody on television who had never voted in their lives and they were in their 80s and I almost fell out on the floor in a dead faint. But I could see where if you don't know your rights, if you don't know what the issues are, if you don't know where the polling place is, if you don't know the person who's running, if there has not been a forum that you can attend, then you may feel disenfranchised. So we've got to make our people feel that they're important, that what they have to say is important. We have to write it down so that we can all see it, put it in a manner that everybody can understand, and then go forward with that one view, one vision, one voice. And I think that would get us to at least halfway where we want to go.
yes, yes, Ms. LeCompte. I like that. One vision, one voice, one vote. I like that. Um, and and I do agree. We've got to be one vision. We've got to be one voice. We have to get on one accord. But I think within that, the minority vote is still also important, and can be impactful, just with our size. And in this nation, we have issues that we care about. So, Representative Greenwood, I'm going to turn to you to talk about the impact of the minority vote.
Well, the minority vote is very important. And really, it goes back to some of the things we've already said, in that uh, voting for us is really voting for our everyday lives. is really voting for the things that impact us daily. So when we choose elected officials as Black people, we are choosing people that should represent us and know exactly about the issues that we bring to the table. Some of our issues that we bring to the table are so much different than other populations.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's so important that we continue to stay engaged and maintain engagement during this whole process. When you spoke earlier at the beginning about numbers and statistics about the previous November election,
Mm-hmm.
those numbers are just a sad reflection of what we should be able to do as Black people. We should be burning down the voting places to come and vote and get our voices heard, whether it's local elections. I think some of the most impactful things happen at local levels. So it's very important who we elect to those positions as well as state, as well as our judges. We know how important they are in interpreting and implementing laws. And so everyone has their place, and it's up to us to continue to push it as Black people to understand the importance of voting and to try to move everyone ahead. It's something to always talk about what you want to see done. But to me, voting is actually putting it to action. It's more than talking. You're actually taking a step to do something about it, to be involved.
Absolutely.
I wanted to jump in there really quick just to share, especially with young people, the movement that's happening, I think, is a wonderful opportunity for the young people to understand how powerful their presence and their voices are. So though they're out there protesting, they're making a loud enough sound for people to make decisions about things that are being changed. Even, we yell loud enough, so now there's a second look happening with these officers. You know what I mean? They're starting to see there is a reaction to their action. And in this generation, I think because they're so used to, let me put it in the microwave and get my popcorn 5 minutes later, there's a disconnect with the longevity of actually seeing their vote turn into something. They can't connect with it because they don't see an immediate result, right? But I think like now is a perfect opportunity. And this is why I appreciate you all doing this, because now I believe young people have an opportunity to actually see how powerful their voices are. And if we can just kind of hone in, like what you were saying, State Representative Greenwood, that now the action that you've been doing, how you marching and your voices have been heard, has gotten people to respond. You can take that same action and do it in the voting place, and someone has to respond to what you're saying. And I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think with young people, or even people who are kind of new to voting because they never thought that their voices could be heard so far away, that here is a real life application of when you say something, when you put your thoughts and your opinions on paper at that voting range, at that voting poll, that there is a response to the things that you say and do, the action. I like when you said that, State Representative. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I think that's great. And I think that that's something that our young people need to hear, because we do have this class of 2020 where we have a lot of first-time voters. They're just turning 18. And so this November may be their first time voting, and seeing all of the civil unrest that is currently taking place. This gives them something actionable, as it's been mentioned, actionable to do to help be a part of the change. Because protesting isn't for everyone, but voting for 18 and older is definitely something that is for everyone. And then when you talk about voting, we had a question, and I'm going to take a step back to the registration piece. We had a question from Carol Brown. She said that she registered to vote absentee in the previous local and primary elections. Will she have to vote by absentee ballot for the national election in November? Does anyone?
I do know that part of the information that was in the legislation that was passed and signed by the governor
Mhm.
for voting expansion included that um, all residents of Illinois who voted in, I got to look at my notes for that, who voted in the 2018 general election, the 2019 consolidated election, and the 2020 general primary election, they will automatically be mailed applications for early voting. So that was all part of the legislation, again, to ensure everyone will have the access to voting and to ensure safety during this time of COVID as well. So all individuals who participated in those voting cycles will receive vote by mail applications automatically.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Greenwood. So I want to, when you talk about legislation, I want to switch gears a bit. Again, going back to the time that we're living in, the civil unrest, there are protests all across the country in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. We're calling for change so that citizens can be protected from excessive force being used by officers against Black and brown bodies, even to the point of death, as we've seen with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And there's across social media, even with Breonna Taylor, there are many posts and memes that are saying, we're calling for the arrest for Breonna Taylor. Now, for those of us, let's say we voted, we've done our due diligence, we've registered, we marched to the polls. How then can we actually work with elected officials to help get legislation changed so that we can have something in place to help protect us? And Ms. LeCompte, I'm going to start with you on that question.
Well, here lately on the national level, 13 women's order to work in solidarity to make sure that the agenda items that they want carried are similar and that they're on one accord. I think that the same thing needs to happen on the local level, where we have some meetings and decide we can get these things done and how we can work together. That does not mean we all have the same thought and situation. Then we go to our legislators, not calling one at a time, tearing the telephones out of the walls and writing letters that don't make sense, but that we come together with a focus on what our community needs, on how we can get it done, that we make suggestions to our legislators, that we have the town halls and not the protest, but the protesting meetings where we come together to iron out our own issues with what we're trying to propose as a people. And that means we get into the schools, the churches, and work. And that it's an action movement, politics standing still. So we've all got to get busy and go across race, religion, color, creed, income, educational barriers, everything that will help our legislators make sound decisions. And then we must listen to them. We may come with something that 3,000 of us may want it, but it may not be a doable. So we've got to be able to have a relationship with them. We don't them and we put them in office and we just all run off. And we never come back again to help them survive what they're probably surviving on a day-to-day basis. So it's necessary that we work together as a unit, then go to our legislators, and then when they move it to the places they move it to, we need to be there to vote. We don't need to put it out there and then automatically become something, a law. And we're going to start getting $25 an hour. We've got to follow the path of that particular legislation, of that thing we've asked our legislators to do. We've got to support them. When we get good ones, we've got to keep them. And that's very important, I think, in the movement. That calls for, again, the collaboration, action, the one voice, the view, the movement, all working together in one accord to get in the wrong direction. And the wrong direction is the one that does not take you to that final place where we can take it to a need to say some.
Okay. Miss, so I think we may have cut out Miss LeCompte. I'm gonna Representative Greenwood, and thank
In the
you.
middle of that. Oh my.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Okay. Okay.
So no, go ahead and finish your thought.
Yeah, I thought I had said. I thought I thought I'd overspent my time. I simply ended by saying that only when we come together with a focus
Yes.
on which we can all agree, and we then take our legislators and understand that sometimes when we take something to them, it may not be realistic, no matter how many of us think it is. And they can and listen to them when they show us an alternative way to get what we want done, or to tell us the steps that we take one at a time. Sometimes we have to take baby steps. We cannot take a big, uh, giant dinosaur step and get where we want to go. And I use wages as my example.
Mm-hmm.
We might want $25 an hour. They're going to be small steps if we can get there, because that also what you get at McDonald's impacts what a teacher gets at East St. Louis Senior High School. So you have to be able to look at the big picture. Our legislators can help us do that, and we, by the same token, can help them see where we see that we can get in that place. And then when we get them out there and get them on our side, I say let us continue to vote for those friends we have, and also help them get what needs to be done with other legislators with whom they have to work. It is a give and take in that. Every legislator cannot just have what they want for their community. You have some other people sitting in other chairs, and we have to keep that in mind as well. But the key is working together, having the ear of our legislator, and all not just coming when we have a problem, but coming when we have what we think is a solution, a suggestion, an idea, a proposal, and most of all, some help of that person that's sitting in that hot seat.
Yes.
That seat is hot.
Thank you, Ms. LeCompte. Good. So
well, I didn't really know that.
So, Representative Greenwood, I'm going to let you chime in on that as well. And I do want to throw this out there. So I get that we've got to support, those that we've elected, not just when it's a problem, but support the things that they are standing for as well. But if I'm in a place, I'm like, for example, we've got these new voters, maybe voting for the very first time. How do I even begin? Where do I go? Who's having these meetings? Where do I go to find out? This is where I can go to try to get on one accord with others who are meeting about the different legislations.
So I can speak for myself. I do a lot of posting on my social media account. So that would be, I just have 2 Facebook pages. But my state Facebook page is where I normally put anything that I'm hosting, having, anything I'm supporting, anything that I'm asking constituents about to assist me with. And I want to go back to Mrs. LeCompte in her remarks, because one of the greatest honors I could have, of course, is serving the 114th district. It's truly been a blessing. And for me in this role, it's all about providing resources and information to the constituents that I serve. So many people, you don't know about grant opportunities, you don't know about um, education opportunities, you don't know about all of these things that our state is offering resources for. So I feel that is one of the priorities in my job, as well as listening to what the constituents want. So it's about building and creating partnerships and relationships and realizing and understanding compromise. One of the things that I do is meet with various groups. I've met with pastors before on the issue of education. I met with a group of men and women about some issues regarding beautification within the Metro East area. So there's numerous ways. My office is available virtually right now due to COVID, but we'll be up and running, later this month in July, if all the numbers continue to pan out for COVID. But my email, my office phone and messages are still operable, and we're still responding and replying. And I just encourage everyone, there's so many opportunities out here right now for businesses. It's so many opportunities out here for violence prevention programs in different organizations. And I've really been blessed lately to start to build relationships with various organizations that's in our community. So, and to understand exactly what they're doing so I can be able to direct them to more resources and information to assist. So, that's really what it's all about.
I thank you, Representative Greenwood. And then Ms. Chatman, I'm going to throw that question over to you as well, because as Representative Greenwood mentioned, she works with different organizations to give them this information and help educate the community. With working with the Urban League, what opportunities do you all have, kind of in that same vein, to help organize the community and make them aware of how to get that information to help support or even bring up the issues that are important to them, to our elected officials?
Absolutely. We have two registrars in this office. So we are definitely available to help register people to vote. And one of the things I like to say is that we are the community grandparents. We keep our ears to the community so we can hear what's happening. What are your concerns? So that we can direct resources as well. We know what questions to ask. We know who to go to about certain things, and we can advocate on their behalf. So we have 4 core areas, and one of the core areas is civil rights and advocacy. We just recently brought on a VP of public safety, and that is part of what he is doing as well, James Clark. Going out into the communities, doing clean sweeps. And again, we're keeping our ear to the community so that we can address their needs and kind of be that advocate, that go between, so that we can help communicate what those issues are with the appropriate people and be a part of the conversation and the movement to get their concerns addressed, and find ways to filter the appropriate resources to them to meet their needs.
That's great. That's great. Ladies, this has been a wealth of information, very informative, from the voting to legislation, to driving that point home, the importance of our vote and our voice. I want to give each of you just a couple of minutes for any last final thoughts that you would like to share with our viewers on this topic of voting, and just reminding them how important it is. Judge Cruz, I want to start with you.
All right, thank you. First, let me say thank you to Pastor James and to you, Moderator Bowens, and to all of these wonderful women who are on this panel with me. Thank you for your time and consideration. You know, we often hear the scripture that without a vision, the people perish. And I love, if you know, Miss LeCompte, you know that she is a master at getting her point across. And when she said one vision, one vote, one voice, I think that really brings it home that we have a focus. But even with a vision, we have to understand that the vision will disintegrate without action. So we can have all the rhetoric, we can have all the hyperbole, we can have all the meetings that we want to have. But until there is action, that vision is going to disintegrate. And so I just encourage everyone to understand your rights, understand that what we're calling a right should be considered by us as a duty, as a responsibility, as a citizen. For our communities, for our state, for our nation, from whatever perspective we're coming from, we need to make sure we exercise that right. And once again, thank you for having me. I appreciate the time that I've spent here this evening with you all.
Thank you, Judge Cruz. Representative Greenwood, your final thoughts?
Thank you. I would like to echo those thank yous as well. Thank you, Pastor James, and thank you, Nekesha, so much for this great conversation. The ladies, it was awesome being on this panel with you. I just would like to end by saying we need to take this upcoming November election very serious. So serious, in fact, that I truly believe I've heard people say this. It may be cliche, but I believe it. We need to be voting in November like our lives depended on it. There is so much evil and negativity and racism and hatred that is being shown all over our country. And I believe it's up to us to make our voices heard. And again, I think we really do need to vote like our lives depend on it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Greenwood. Ms. Chapman, any final thoughts?
I echo what Judge Cruz has said and what Representative Greenwood says. Thank you so much for having this virtual town hall. Thank you to the vision and the visionary to make this happen. Um, Listen, sometimes when people think about voting, it may seem overwhelming. Some people may feel ashamed that they haven't done it or they don't know enough about it. What I'm going to share is don't be. We can be your community parents. Come on, baby. I'm going to grab you by the hand and we're going to walk you through it. And we're not going to let you fail at it. We're going to provide you with all of the information and the resources that's needed so that you can feel well equipped to let your voices be heard. November is extremely important. Every opportunity that we have to vote is extremely important. And I want those who need to know that it is not too late to start the process to make sure your voice can be heard in November and moving forward. So don't be ashamed. Call and ask your questions. Set an appointment. We will walk you through it. We can help you do the registration online. Um, Check on your family. Check on your aunts and uncles and your little cousins. See, are you registered? If you're not, let's, we can get you some help. We have you because we have to work together to do this, and we are not going to let you walk this by yourself. So use your resources. Don't be embarrassed. We got you. We'll walk this with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chapman. And then last but certainly not least, Ms. LeCompte, your final thoughts.
Wonderful sisters on this panel this evening. I'm so excited to be here with each one of you, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. Today is July 2nd, 2 days before Independence Day. and 123 days before our national election on November the 3rd. What I want to say to you is we must vote. And if you're asking me why we must vote, first of all, we must vote because it is our right and our responsibility. We must vote because there are people who can serve us who have our best interests in their heart, their mind, and their souls. And they care about the now and the then. In other words, the future. You must vote because when you do not vote, you give up your chance to have your say about things. In other words, you give up your chance to use your voice and be heard. You must vote because our ancestors fought and died to have this right. You must vote for the change you want to see happen. And you must vote because that is how you exercise power. And we all know that power concedes nothing without demand. So, my sisters and brothers of all races, religions, creeds, sexual orientations, and financial obligations, it is only thus that we will be able to march forward in 2021. Time is now. The date is November 23rd. So let's vote and let's show that we have power. May God bless you and keep you. And thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. LeCompte. Thank you to each and every one of you. On behalf of Pastor James and Lady James, we truly appreciate you all taking your time out of your day to share this information with us. And for all of the viewers out there that may be watching live, or for those that may watch this later, this has been a wealth of information and support in the effort to actually vote. I pray that something has been said here that will encourage you. If you've never even voted before, that now is the time. This is an actionable item that you can do to be a part and make a difference in this upcoming election. And be sure to make your voices be heard. And again, on behalf of Pastor James and Lady James in Macedonia, we can't close. I am a woman of God. We are a church family. I have to close out in prayer. I think this is a time that we need prayer more than we've ever needed it before. And if you all will join me, close your eyes, bow your head, and join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, once again, I just want to say thank you, God, for this day. I thank you for this moment. God, I thank you for this opportunity to educate and empower these, your people, God. God, I thank you for our pastor who has the vision of the civic responsibility ministry to go out and empower and educate our community, God. God, we know that you are a God that is on the side of the oppressed. So, God, we just ask that you would continue to give each of us wisdom, God, from the leadership, God, from the White House to the house around the corner, God. We ask that you would give us wisdom, that you would give us wisdom to go out in the polls and make our voices be heard. God, we ask that you would give wisdoms to the leaders in our country, God. God, for everyone that's on the ballot, God, we ask that you would give them wisdom, God, to make the right decisions that are for our people, God. God, we ask that you would continue to have mercy upon us, God. Have mercy upon us when we have gone astray, God, and continue to lead us and guide us from the crooked path to a straight path, God. God, we thank you for being the good God that you are. And in spite of everything that we see, you're still good and you're still God. And we thank you, God. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Amen.
You all have a wonderful evening. And as Pastor James always says, you are a gift from God, and Black lives still matter. Thank you all, and have a blessed night.
Thank you.
Here's